everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for our presentation on the TN visa. My name is Dustin Saldarriaga, and I'm an immigration attorney here at Scott Legal. We're going to spend some time today talking about the TN visa, which is one of the most common visas that our firm assists clients with. Specifically, we'll talk about the TN visa requirements and whether a TN visa requires sponsorship by the employer. This is a question that often comes up, especially on behalf of employers. A few questions before we get started. Some of you may know that our firm was actually it's founded by Ian Scott, who prior to having an E2 visa was on a TN visa for about a decade. And so he personally navigated the process, and his experience really does inform the way that we work with clients. And we're very sensitive to the complexity of the immigration process and do take that into account with each and every one of our clients. The firm is a full-service immigration firm, though we do have a focus on business immigration. We assist clients with family immigration, recreational immigration, whatever topics come up, we're here to help. So please do reach out if any questions related to immigration come up. This webinar is part of an ongoing series. We try to do at least 2 webinars each month, and they do cover a range of topics. We upload our webinars to YouTube. So if you're not able to make a live session, or if you want to check out some of our other webinars on different topics, do visit our YouTube channel. If you search for Scott Legal PC, you should find it, and we'll also include a link in the follow-up email, which brings me to the next point. After the webinar, we will be sending you the PowerPoint presentation that you see on your screen now. We'll also send a comprehensive TN visa guide to each of you. We'll send you a link where you can sign up for future webinars, and we'll also send you a link to our YouTube channel and a link to the actual recording of this specific webinar. If you have a question during the presentation, Michaela, who I'll introduce in a moment, and I will be responding to all of the questions that come in. Please go ahead and include your question either in the chat box or in the question and answer box. We will be monitoring both, and we will try to get to each and every question, as I mentioned before. So as I mentioned, Michaela Vrastova will be joining us. She is a fellow associate at the firm. We're very honored and lucky to have her here today because she has a wealth of experience. She's personally processed many TN visa applications. So she really has seen the full spectrum of things that you see in processing these visas. So without further ado, Michaela, I will pass it off to you.
Thank you, Dustin, and good morning, everyone. So let's get started with the TN visa requirements. So to qualify for a TN visa, you must meet the following requirements. So first, you must be a citizen of either Canada or Mexico. So there are 2 important things here. So what is important is that you are a national or a citizen of either Canada or Mexico, and it doesn't matter which country you were born in. So as long as you have passport of either Canada or Mexico, you can qualify for a TN visa. And the second thing is that you must have a citizenship of either Canada or Mexico. And if you are only a legal permanent resident, that unfortunately is not enough. So you must have the actual passport. Then the second requirement is that the profession you would like to perform in the US must appear on the list of professions in the TN regulations. So unfortunately, not all professions or not all people could qualify for a TN, but only certain listed professions could qualify. So professions such as architect, engineer, lawyer, economist, interior designer, graphic designer, and many others. Those are professions that qualify for a TN, but not all kind of professions qualify. So you would want to double check the TN kind of listed professions to see if you would qualify. Then the third requirement is that you must have the required qualifications to practice the profession you would like to perform in the US. So again, this is kind of specified in the TN regulations. I would say that most of the professions require that you have education, which means usually that would be at least a bachelor's degree. Then there are certain professions that kind of require that you have kind of education plus work experience. And then there are certain professions that would allow you to only qualify based on your work experience. So no education is required. But that is kind of not that common. And one of the categories is management consultant. And Dustin will discuss this in a little bit more detail shortly. The next requirement for the TN visa is that you already must have a pre-arranged job in the US. So, you know, it's not allowed to kind of like come to the US on the TN visa and, you know, interview and kind of like start looking for a job on a TN visa. You know, to qualify for the TN, you actually have to have a job offer. And you must have a job already secured in the US. And then the last requirement is that in the job you will perform, you must be employed to engage in professional activities that are consistent with the listed profession. So this basically means that, you know, for example, if you are applying, you know, as an architect, you know, the job you'll be doing in the US must be that of an architect, and the job duties must be, you know, consistent with the architect profession. And a couple other things I just wanted to quickly mention about the TN visa. So the job in the US can be either full-time or part-time, and there is no kind of like actual or kind of like set minimum hours you need to kind of like do in the US. I would say that most kind of like applications we do are for full-time jobs, but it's definitely possible to get a TN for a part-time job, for example, for 20 hours. And it's also possible to get TN visas for like 2 different employers, for example. So you can get a TN visa for one employer doing, you know, for example, 20 hours, and then another TN visa for the second employer, you know, again, doing like 10 or additional 20 hours per week. And what is also important is to kind of realize that to qualify for a TN visa, your degree kind of has to match the TN profession under which you are qualifying. So, you know, let's say, for example, that, you know, you have a bachelor's degree in accounting, but, you know, in your free time, you kind of became an interior designer. So you're kind of thinking, you know, can you qualify with your bachelor's degree? You know, because you have a bachelor's degree, can you qualify and come to the US as a TN under the interior designer? So, you know, unfortunately, you know, that would not be possible because you have a bachelor's degree in accounting. You can only come to the US on a TN under the accountant TN category. If you would like to come as an interior designer, you know, you would have to have a bachelor's degree again in kind of the field, which would be, you know, like architecture or interior design. And one last thing I wanted to mention is that the TN visa is a non-immigrant visa. So you know, it doesn't mean that you can kind of like stay in the US indefinitely as a you know, as a permanent resident, but there is no kind of limit as to how many times you can apply for the TN visa. So you can, you know, you can basically keep applying for a TN visa indefinitely or as long as you qualify. But I will say that, you know, people who have been kind of like living in the US for like, you know, let's say, I don't know, 15, 20 years on the TN visa, you know, if you kind of live in the US for such an extended period of time on a, you know, on a non-immigrant visa like a TN visa, then at some point, you know, the CBP or the government could question whether you really still have a non-immigrant intent, meaning that you still, you know, plan to return to your home country. But the general rule is that, you know, you can apply for a TN visa as many times as you want, and as long as you can show the non-immigrant intent, you know, you could keep kind of like qualifying. So now let's discuss a sponsorship and a TN visa. So what is a sponsorship? So sponsorship, you know, is kind of like an term in immigration law the employers are kind of very wary of, because you know, the US employers or the US companies, you know, when they hear the term sponsorship, you know, they always think that, you know, and they are usually required to kind of file you know, documents on the applicant's behalf with the government. They need to make certain, you know, representations about the applicant's salary, about, you know, like where the applicant will be working, and things like that. And they, you know, usually have to pay government fees for the visa application. But the term sponsorship is really kind of different in the context of TN visas and in the context of kind of other work visas. So, you know, let's say when someone is applying for an H-1B or for an L-1 visa, you know, the US employer, the US company really has kind of like a lot of, you know, responsibilities, a lot of things the company needs to do. So, you know, for the H-1B and L-1 visas, you know, the company has to pay certain minimum wage. The company needs to, you know, keep certain documents in files in case there is an audit. And there are many, many other responsibilities and like things that have to be done. But that's not necessarily the case, you know, for when a company is sponsoring a TN visa applicant. So really, you know, what the company needs to do, you know, when a company wants to hire or wants to sponsor a person for a TN visa, you know, is to really just kind of sign, you know, a draft and sign an employment letter that kind of goes over, you know, what the person will be doing in the US. But you know, the company really, you know, there is no minimum wage the company needs to pay. So they can pay you kind of like any salary as they want. But I will say that if the salary, you know, let's say that you are coming here as an economist, working full time, and they will be paying you, you know, really kind of like, I don't know, $20,000 per year. You know, that's kind of an extreme, and the government could definitely question that. But as long as the salaries kind of, you know, make sense for the kind of for the position and for the, you know, area where you will be working, you know, that's fine. And there is no kind of like minimum hourly wage or anything like that they have to pay you. You know, there is also kind of not set, you know, like a work location you need to be working from. So let's say that, you know, in the TN application, you know, you mentioned that you will be working from New York, but later, you know, the company kind of decides to move you to California. You know, that's completely fine for the TN visa, and they don't have to kind of file any amendment or anything like that with the government. So the TN visa is really, you know, the US company, you know, really what they need to do is to just kind of draft the employment letter, you know, list your job duties, describe what you'll be doing in the US, and provide you the signed copy. And if you are a Canadian national, then you know, you can just apply for the TN visa at the port of entry, meaning that you can you know, just show up at one of the pre-clearance locations and apply for the TN visa there. And kind of like no USCIS forms, like nothing has to be kind of filed in advance. And what you will just kind of need is the employment letter, evidence of your degrees, and certain other things Dustin will kind of go over later. But you know, no USCIS forms kind of have to be filed in advance. You know, if you are a Mexican national, then you know, you cannot just apply at the port of entry. You do have to go to a consulate. But again, you know, unless, and this is a case for both Canadians and Mexicans, unless you are doing like a change of status or extension of status with USCIS, you know, no forms, no USCIS forms, and no government fees have to be kind of paid to USCIS. And so I mentioned, you know, the one case where the process gets kind of a little bit more complex, and that is when you are applying for a change of status or extension of status from the US. And I will say that this is not that common. And usually when we do TN visas, you know, we do them, you know, for Canadians, you know, I would say 99% of time Canadians just go and apply at a port of entry, and Mexican nationals just go and apply at a consulate. I would say that during COVID, we were doing kind of more change of status and extension of status petitions. And so what is a change of status and extension of status petition? So, you know, let's say that you are already in the US on some other status. You know, let's say, you know, you are here as a B1 visitor, and you found a job and you would like to apply for a TN. So as I mentioned, you know, you have the opportunity to go to either a port of entry or to a consulate. But if you prefer that you just want to kind of stay in the US and you know, apply from within the US, you could file a change of status petition with the government. And then, you know, in that case, the company would need to file a USCIS form, pay a USCIS filing fee. And then there is also an option to pay for a premium processing to the government. And if you decide to do that, then the government would basically give you a decision within 15 days. And if they approve it, you can then start to work in the kind of like in the US, you know, after you get the approval. So that will be kind of the change of status case. And extension of status is a case when you are already in the US on a TN status, and you know, you don't want to leave, you don't want to go and apply at a port of entry or at a consulate, and you just kind of prefer to stay in the US, you know, then you can file an extension of status for the TN status with the USCIS. And again, you know, after you get the kind of the approval, you can just kind of keep working for the company. But as I said, you know, because the process for Canadians of applying at a port of entry is just so much, you know, easier. It's so much faster. It's so much cheaper. You know, 99% of, I would say, like almost everyone, you know, just applies at the port of entry. And even for Mexican nationals, you know, it's usually kind of just like faster and more convenient to apply at a consulate. So I would say that, you know, the USCIS filings for, you know, TN change of status or extension of status are not that common. Perfect. So now let's discuss the differences, you know, for Canadians and Mexican nationals. So as I mentioned, you know, Canadians have one huge advantage, and that is that they can just apply for a TN at a port of entry. So CBP, you know, says that you can apply at really kind of like any port of entry, but they did designate, I believe, like 14 port of entries where the process, you know, where they kind of recommend that if you're applying, especially first time for a TN, you should, you know, they recommend to apply at one of those 14 places, but you can really, you know, just apply at any port of entry. And for Canadians, the visas can be issued for 3 years. So, and I would say the 3 year is kind of like the maximum period of time you can get. You know, let's say that the employment letter or the US company only wants to employ you for 1 year, and they specify that in the TN letter, then, you know, obviously you would get the TN only for 1 year. But you know, if they specify that they want to hire you for 3 years, then you can stay in the US and you'll be given the TN status for 3 years. If you are a Canadian and your spouse is Canadian, then obviously, your spouse can apply for the TD status at the port of entry. But if your spouse is not Canadian, then an interesting thing is that your spouse must actually go to a consulate, and he or she must get a TD visa in a passport. So that's important thing to keep in mind if your spouse is not a Canadian national. And so Mexicans unfortunately cannot just show up at the port of entry and apply for a TN visa there, but they must go to a U.S. consulate and apply for a visa at a consulate. And so this slide, it hasn't been updated yet, but so in the past, the Mexican nationals could get the TN visa stamp only for 1 year, but actually last week there has been an update, in the TN regulations, and now Mexican nationals can get the TN visa stamp for 4 years, which is amazing news, because they don't you don't need to go to a consulate to kind of like renew your visa that often. So that has been a great recent change in the regulations. So you can now get the TN visa for up to 4 years. Yeah, the kind of the fee you will have to pay for a visa is a little bit higher than it was, but I believe it's only like $200 or $300 more or something like that. And the renewal for Mexican nationals, in some cases it can be done through mail, but generally Mexican nationals do have to go to get the TN visa stamp to a consulate.
Great, thank you. Yes, thank you, Michaela. So I'm going to be speaking about a couple particularly risky categories, risky meaning higher chance of denial. Before I do that, I did want to touch on a few questions that rolled in. Michaela, you brought up a lot of information there that was great, and I think several people had questions. So first of all, I see a couple times it was asked, what about citizens from Africa, Nigeria, and others? Michaela, what would be their options?
Yeah, let me see. So I'm just gonna go, like I see the first question. I'm still, so I'm a Canadian citizen since 2019. Before I became Canadian in 2016, my visa was in. Yeah, so even if you have a dual citizenship, like as long as you are citizen of either Canada or Mexico, you can qualify for a TN visa. And if you kind of had either like a visa denial or your visa was in administrative processing or anything like that in the past, if you are now a Mexican national, you would want to disclose that on the DS-160 application and just kind of explain what happened if your visa was ever denied. If you are Canadian, at the port of entry, they could ask you about it, like what happened, but they just may not. And just because your visa was ever kind of denied or was in administrative processing, that doesn't mean that you don't qualify. It would depend like what the reasons were for denial and things like that. But yeah, you could still go ahead and apply. And I believe the second question is there any available TN for a candidate from Nigeria? So, unfortunately, no, the TN visa is really just for citizens of Canada and Mexico, but other visas, such as, H-1B-Ls, could be, you could qualify for those.
Right, and just as a reminder, the TN visa stems from NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. So it is a treaty between the US, Canada, and Mexico. Does the list of approved occupations ever get updated or changed? And Michaela, I'm happy to also answer, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I don't believe they change the list itself that often, but Dustin, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, no, I think maybe when the new treaty was executed just a few years back, they might have slightly changed it, but frankly, it does not change often. And one thing we do as practitioners is when a client comes to us and wants to talk about a specific occupation, we load up the regulations. So if you Google NAFTA TN regulations, the first link that comes up lists out all the occupations. They don't change often, and they're actually surprisingly clear compared to other regulations. So do take a look if you have questions. And then Michaela, there were a couple here that I thought really built nicely on what you were talking about. In your experience, is it better to get pre-approved from USCIS or to apply at a port of entry? I think you made that quite clear, but maybe expand on that a little more.
Yeah, I would say that it just kind of like most people just apply at a port of entry, because as I mentioned, it's just so much faster, it's cheaper. You will kind of know the decision, kind of immediately. So I would say that, yeah, it's kind of just like much more convenient for most people to apply at a port of entry. If you are already in the US, you want to do the change of status, then and you don't want to leave, then I would apply with the USCIS. But generally it's just we usually recommend the port of entry. And then I see the second question, degree should be evaluated. I have PhD, master's, bachelor's. Should I evaluate all academic records? So it's actually interesting because for the TN, you don't necessarily kind of need to, I think this question is kind of getting into whether you need to get kind of evaluation that your foreign degrees are equivalent to a US degree. And, you usually have to get those evaluations for like, H-1B visa, but for the TN visa, that is not required. So if you have a foreign, degrees, you would just kind of submit the kind of the diploma and the transcripts, but you don't have to get the evaluation. And the question, like which one you would kind of need to show, or you would need to submit. So kind of like any that are kind of like relevant in the field. So let's say you have like bachelor's in engineering, master's in engineering, PhD in engineering. So you would submit all of those. But let's say that the bachelor's was not really kind of like relevant to the TN profession of engineer. So then, you kind of like wouldn't necessarily include or focus on the bachelor's, but only on the master's and PhD. But if all of the, all of the diplomas, all of the transcripts are kind of like relevant to the TN profession you are qualifying under, then you would, you would show or submit all of those.
Right. And, I like that question because it kind of encourages you to go to the requirements. So for example, if you're applying as an economist, the requirement is a baccalaureate degree. There's no mention of a master's, there's no mention of a PhD. So what you want to show is that you have that bachelor's degree. In the employer letter, when they talk about why they want you, it's great to say, well, this person also has a master's and a PhD, but that's not why you qualify. And I think it's important to separate the two. How do you qualify, and why are you demanded for the job? So as far as the government's concerned, to qualify for the TN, you really only have to show that bachelor's. But you do want to make that clear in the application that that's how you're qualifying. And what I've found in practice is I think, Michaela, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you got your degree in Canada or Mexico, there is no need for any kind of foreign credential evaluation to be done. However, if you got your degree, say in London or anywhere outside of NAFTA, outside of Canada, Mexico, or the United States, you would need that equivalency test.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. I think, yeah, most people have, like the degrees from Canada, Mexico, but I believe, yeah, that's correct.
Perfect. So now I will slightly switch gears and we'll look at two categories that are particularly risky. And again, what I mean when I say risky is that these categories tend to have higher denial rates. The first we'll look at is the management consulting category. The reason why this category is especially scrutinized by the government is that there is no degree requirement. I believe there is only one other occupational category, which, if I'm not mistaken, is scientific writer or technology writer. That category and management consultant are the only two categories you can apply under if you don't have a degree, if you don't have, for example, a college degree. So as you can imagine, if someone who is a citizen of Mexico or Canada wants to come to the US and is looking for the easiest visa to get to work in the US, the TN would be the first thing to come to mind. And if they don't have a college degree, they're really only looking at two job categories. So the government sees a lot of people applying in these categories, specifically management consultant, who unfortunately don't actually qualify. And the government since 1990, they've been quite explicit about issuing policy statements on the fact that they will strictly interpret that category. So let me pull this back up on my screen. So basically, let's talk a little bit, because applying as a management consultant is not risky in and of itself. So for example, if you work for a management consulting firm and you have a college degree in business management, that is a very straightforward case. Where the category gets risky is if you're not coming to the US to work for a management consulting firm. Let's take an example. If you have a background in solar technology and you have a job offer from a solar panel company located in the US that says that they want to hire you to come to the US to basically advise them on how to improve their business. A solar panel company is not a management consulting company. Let's say that the applicant doesn't have a college degree, that they, through experience, are just an expert on solar panels. That is an example of how you can use a management consulting TN category, but it would be difficult to do. So let's talk a little bit about how you would want to structure that, by first talking about how does the government define the role? And whenever Michaela or I prepare a TN visa application, the first step is almost always, after hearing from the client what job they plan to do and what their job duties are, to look at how the government defines the job. And fortunately, the government publishes the way they define jobs on two main websites. The first is called ONET, O-N-E-T, and the second is the Occupational Outlook Handbook, OOH. These are publications of the US Department of Labor. And so if you visit ONET or OOH and you look at management consultants, the government defines the roles as those who gather information about a problem that needs to be solved and develop solutions or alternative practices. And they make recommendations to management and confer with managers to make sure their recommendations are working. So if you are, say, this solar panel expert, you don't have a college degree and you're coming to the US to do this, you want to make sure that the job that you'll be doing for the solar panel company does fit as closely as possible into how the government defines the role. So you would be coming to the US to gather information about a problem that's affecting the solar panel company. You're developing solutions to address that problem. You're making recommendations to management. You're meeting with managers to make sure that your recommendations on their solar panel company are working. The other thing that's very important to make sure to do, and to take a step back, in order to do what I just described, it's important to talk with the employer, and this is something, if we were hired to prepare the application, this is exactly what we would do, would be to talk with the employer and to talk with the applicant to make sure that the job duties are aligned and that they actually will be doing things that are aligned with how the government thinks of a management consultant job. So the applicant would also want to make sure that even though they don't have a college degree, that they do qualify for the TN visa. So if we pull up the TN regulations, and again, you can do this by just simply Googling right now if you want, NAFTA TN regulations. If you look at the management consultant category, it says requirements include a bachelor's degree, a baccalaureate degree, or equivalent professional experience attesting to 5 years of experience as a management consultant. So a bachelor's degree or 5 years as a management consultant, or 5 years experience in a field of specialty related to the consulting agreement. So that third category is what we're talking about with the solar panel expert. This is someone who, in our example, doesn't have a college degree, has never been a management consultant, so wouldn't satisfy the 5-year requirement there, but they are an expert in solar technology. And let's assume they do have that 5 years of experience. If they didn't, then they would not qualify for a TN visa. If they didn't have a degree, have never been a management consultant, and don't have 5 years of experience in the field, they do not meet the requirements. So they would be ineligible. But let's say they do have that 5 years of experience. So they would focus on that as the way they are qualifying. And when you're qualifying based on experience, you really do want to support your application by including letters from past employers, for example, who say, you know, this person has worked for us for 5 years in the capacity as an expert in solar panel technology. You really do want to support your application with documentation. So that really is, you know, showing the government that you really do qualify for the management consulting category is critical. And finally, what I think is especially important when applying to work as a management consultant is to define that problem that the company is experiencing and that the management consultant will be addressing. So this would be described in the employment letter that the employer would sign and submit, and that the applicant would bring with them to the port of entry. And it really would say, okay, here's the problem our company is facing. We're really having a hard time, say, breaking into the solar technology market in the US, or marketing our products and services to Canadians who move to the US, something like that. And this person, who is the TN applicant, is going to help us with this problem because they have this background. They have 5 years of experience. They're an expert in this. They've published whatever they've done. And you really want to very clearly define that, because that, again, fits the person into the framework of a management consultant, which is what the government's doing. Keep in mind, the person who's reviewing an application is a government employee. They are bureaucratic. They see a lot of applications. They are not experts on solar technology or probably any of the occupational categories that you would be applying for. So it's important to understand how they think about it, which is, again, ONET and OOH, and really fitting your job into that framework as best you can. So now let me switch to the economist category. This is another category that is scrutinized. The reason is that, among other things, in 2017, the government issued a policy memo. And what that memo said is basically economists do not include financial analysts, market research analysts, or marketing specialists. So in other words, what an economist does is what ONET and OOH defines an economist to do very specifically. So what is that? Economists should specialize in either macroeconomics or microeconomics, and they should study the impact of supply and demand on the behavior of individuals or firms. And they should study the impact of economic indicators on broader sectors of the economy. So if you're applying to be an economist on a TN visa, you really do need to be doing economic research on the market or on a specific business, and basically using math to make recommendations and solve problems. So that could include conducting research, preparing reports, developing plans to address economic problems related to the production or distribution of goods, or monetary and fiscal policy. Those are some examples, but again, spend time on OOH or ONET if you're thinking about applying in the economist category. That is in contrast, what I just described is what the government defines an economist to do, what they should do and what they can do if they're applying for a TN visa in the economist category. Contrast that to financial analysts, market research analysts, and marketing specialists, which the government has said do not qualify for a TN visa under the economist category. Financial analysts are those who primarily, and I'm borrowing language from the government, primarily conduct quantitative analyses of information that affect investment programs. So in other words, they are looking for opportunities to commit money, to invest money, and to generate profits. That's a financial analyst, which again would not fall under the economist category. Market research analysts and marketing specialists also would be rejected if they apply under the economist category. They, according to the government, are those who analyze data to help companies market their products and services. They also might research competitors' pricing methods, and they would make recommendations to their employer. They may also design brochures or commercials or anything else to sell products. So again, market research analysts and marketing specialists would not qualify under the economist category for a TN visa. So what would they do? If you are applying for a TN visa and your job duties are basically to be a marketing specialist to help a company market its products or services, what should you do? There are a few things. So one thing you could do is to look at another category. Think about your job duties and see if they actually fit with another category better. One category that might work is the management consulting category. So if we take our solar panel expert, if the problem the company's facing is we're having a really hard time breaking into a specific market in the United States, we want more clients from a certain area. And the, let's say, Canadian applicant is a specialist in solar panel technology in the Southwest United States, and that's the market that the company wants to break into. You might frame that application as a management consulting application, where that applicant is really addressing a specific problem for the company. The other thing you could do is to really ask whether the job duties that are defined could actually be defined as an economist role. Is the role actually marketing, or would the person actually have the required background to apply as an economist and actually to use quantitative research? And maybe there's an opportunity to align the job duties with what the government wants an economist to do. The final thing that the applicant could do is frankly to consider other visa options. So sometimes the TN visa is just not a suitable option. Options could be the H-1B, Michaela mentioned a few of these before, the L-1 visa, potentially the O-1 visa. We're not going to talk about those in this presentation, and I know a question came up about the H-1B. We're not going to talk about those visa options here, but please do reach out to us if it does seem like those might be a better option for you if the TN visa is not. So the TN application process explained. Michaela spoke about this quite a bit. So frankly, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but in summary, Canadians, excuse me, Canadians and Mexicans, the process is different depending on which passport they have. A Canadian can apply at a port of entry for an initial TN application. And typically, as Michaela explained, that is the easiest way to approach an application for a Canadian, is simply to prepare the application packet and to have the Canadian approach a port of entry and submit their application to the border official, who would then review it in a matter of typically minutes and admit the person in TN status. That is by and large the easiest way to apply. So for Canadian nationals, we do tend to recommend that. The supporting documentation that they would have with them is really first and foremost a letter from the employer that says that there is a job offer that this person has, that explains their job duties, that shows that the job duties are aligned with how the regulations define the job duty, the role, the occupation, the occupational category. That letter would have an original signature, that's critical, and it would have in the company's letterhead the contact information for the company. Certain ports of entry are very particular about that and would actually deny an application if it's missing that letterhead. The other important thing to have in the application packet is supporting documents. So again, You want to, if you are applying for a TN visa on your own, you want to make sure to go to the regulations and read what is required. If you're applying as an economist, again, you only need a degree. It says baccalaureate or licenciatura degree. If you're applying as a management consultant with experience, it would be documenting, again, the experience you have through prior employer letters, etc. One quick thing that I did want to add is if your degree is not a precise match with the occupation, so let's say you're applying as an economist and you have a degree in a field that's related to economics, but is not strictly economics. One thing you could do, it is risky, but you could, assuming your degree is related to economics, provide your transcript and go in and actually highlight the courses that are economics courses, and in the employer letter really highlight that this person has completed a course load that is equivalent to what someone getting a degree in economics would have. That is something that we do sometimes in some applications. Ideally, the person would have a degree that explicitly matches the job category. So economists, they would have a degree in economics, but sometimes that's not possible. And you might focus on the transcript and the courses taken. So some ports of entry are optimized for faster TN processing. If you are a first-time TN applicant, and really for any applicants, I would recommend contacting the port of entry that you're thinking about approaching before you do it. So give them a call. Make sure that they're processing TN visas. Make sure you know what hours they're processing TN visas. And if there's any particular procedure, like maybe there's a specific entrance that you need to use for TN visas. It typically doesn't take long to contact the port of entry, but the benefit of doing that and just having that clarity and knowing if they just are not processing at the time is really worthwhile information. During COVID, a lot of ports of entry had changed their operating hours or wanted to make sure that they didn't have a lot of applicants at a specific time. So they were deliberate about this. So it's worthwhile to check. For Mexican nationals, for the initial TN application, you must apply at a consulate. So typically that would be in Mexico, though technically any consulate in the world should be able to issue a TN visa. The process is to first file a DS-160 form. The form is online. You would pay the application fee, and then you would schedule and submit your biometrics, your fingerprints, and additional information the government will ask for at that appointment. You would then schedule your TN interview, and you'd show up. If you are applying for a renewal, if you already have a TN visa and you're applying to renew it, the consulate might have an expedited process where you can apply by mail. Just send in your application materials, but that depends on the consulate, and it also can change. So oftentimes you wouldn't know if they're opening that option until you've applied, and then they'll say you don't have to come in for an interview, just mail in your application materials. But that is something that's become more common during COVID, just to streamline operations. And as Michaela described before, applying within the US through US Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, is an option regardless of whether you're a national of Mexico or Canada. One slight change is that if you're applying through USCIS, the employer would technically be applying. They would sign the form I-129, which is a USCIS form that initiates the application. Excuse me, that constitutes the application in addition to the supporting documents. When an applicant applies at the border, it really is the worker themselves that's applying. So if there's a denial at the border, it's a denial on the worker's record, technically. If you're applying with the USCIS and there's a denial, it really is not the employee who's denied, it's the employer who's denied. And I may have misspoke before. At the border, it would be the employee who's denied. Okay, some tips. We've covered a few of these. Call the port of entry beforehand. I would say whether you're familiar with the procedures or not, just because they do change, especially during COVID, they've changed quite a bit. Ensure that the employer who signs the employer letter is available and able to answer a call in case the border officer calls. So on the employer letter, it'll have the contact information. It's good to just touch base with the employer beforehand and say, I'm going to be applying, in a few days, likely between 3 and 5 p.m. or whenever it is. Could you just be available in case they give you a call? Just in case. Similarly with a website, a lot of the times the employer letter will have a website listed. Check the website, make sure that it's live, because there are examples where a border officer will visit the website. If it's not live, that causes, justifiably some doubt about whether the job offer is legitimate. So just make sure that that's live. There are certain documents that you need to bring the originals of. So an original diploma. If you bring transcripts, bring official transcripts. And as I mentioned before, bring an original signed letter from the employer. You don't want to bring a copy of that. Certain ports of entry will deny the application if it's a copy of a signature. The TN visa requires a showing of non-immigrant intent. Michaela touched on this before. The TN visa is not a green card. It can be renewed indefinitely as long as you remain eligible. But one thing that the border officer is going to want to see is that you don't plan to enter on a TN visa and adjust status to a green card, for example, and that you do have ties to your home country. This, frankly, isn't usually asked about if someone has had a TN visa, is applying for an initial TN visa or is renewing for the first or second time. But if you are renewing, going into year 7, 8, 9, 10, you may very well start getting questions about, okay, what ties do you actually have to Mexico? What ties do you have to Canada? You've been here for a decade on a TN visa. Ian, who founded our firm, actually, I believe, was on a TN visa for close to a decade. And if he were on this presentation, he would tell you that, it is certainly possible to continue renewing a TN visa through that time period. Just be ready for questions about your ties to your home country. So, copies of bank statements that show that you have funds in your home country, if you have property there, if you have family there, things like that are valid forms of evidence. All right, and we have a few minutes for questions. I know a few have rolled in. Michaela, did you see anything, any questions that would be good to dive into?
Let me see. So one was kind of like asking about the success rate at particular port of entries. And this applicant like heard various stories about like the success rates. So yeah, we often get asked this question, like, by people like, oh, I heard like this port of entry is like really bad. Like my friend had such a bad experience, but we just kind of like generally advise like for people to apply like what's kind of like the most convenient location for them, because we don't really have kind of particularly bad experience at any port of entry, or I don't. What about you, Dustin?
No, I would agree with that. I do think that I believe it's Pearson. Pearson sometimes does have certain procedures. I know that, for example, it can be helpful to really be familiar with your job duties and what percentage of time you spend in each job duty. But frankly, that's probably something that's helpful at any port of entry. So I would agree with you, Michaela. I think it's really not worthwhile to try to game it out necessarily. But if you were considering a specific port of entry, it could be worthwhile to schedule a consultation to discuss.
Yeah, and I would say, like, like when you like Google and like you see these online discussions, and someone is complaining about particular location, like I will say, like, you never like know what really happened. You never know, like, if the person may have had like a wrong degree, or like you just kind of like never know like what really happened. So I wouldn't necessarily, and this is kind of kind of like a general comment, I wouldn't pay like that much attention to these like online discussions, because you just don't know like what really happened.
Absolutely. All right, how can your company help with a TN visa? How much do you charge? Do you really prepare the application for the applicant? So we do help with TN visas. In fact, I would say they're probably the second most common visa that we help with. In terms of the charge, if anyone's interested, I would say we have an engagement letter that details the charges. So please do reach out to us if you're interested in our services, and we can easily send you the engagement letter. Absolutely no commitment. It's just more helpful to see it in writing and understand the full process. We do prepare the application. Basically, a lot of our time on a TN application will be talking with the client about what the job category is, what the job duties will be, what the best category to apply in would be. And then it's really up to the client in terms of whether we work directly with the employer or whether we work with the employee to craft the employer letter in a way that's aligned with what the employee will actually be doing, but in a way that also makes it clear to the government that they're doing a job that is that can be approved under a specific TN job category. So please do reach out. For probably a consultation would be the best step, but even if you don't want a consultation, if you just email us and say, I'm interested in the TN services, please send an engagement letter, we can do that.
There is one last question. Someone was asking, can a Canadian working in the US under the OPT approval concurrently apply for a TN visa? So yeah, this is an interesting question because you can only hold one status in the US. So if you're currently in the US under the F1, you wouldn't be able to apply, for kind of like a concurrent TN employment. But I would say that before the OPT expires, you could either, as I mentioned, kind of file the change of status petition with the USCIS, and you can just kind of stay in the US and then change status to the TN. Or, you could just, depending on whether you're Canadian or Mexican, you could just go and apply for a TN at the port of entry or at a consulate, but you cannot hold the two statuses concurrently.
And then I see, is an I-129 from an employer a safer bet? Because it won't hurt the candidate's personal profile. It really depends. If you're in the US, one example that people do ask about quite a bit is if you're in the US on a TN visa and you get an offer from another employer, what happens if you submit an I-129 to work for the new employer and it's denied? Does it affect your earlier TN status? That's an example where submitting an I-129 would probably be a safer bet, because if the second application for the new employer is denied, it wouldn't affect the initial TN application. So you would just keep on working for that initial employer. But it is a case-by-case situation. And, keep in mind, if you're denied at a port of entry, oftentimes, many people do come to us, they come to our office after they've applied, whether, on their own or through another law firm, and have faced a rejection. And it is possible to apply again at a port of entry. So even if it is on your record, it's possible to rectify that by improving the application and applying a second time. I think that covered all of our questions, and we are coming up on 11 o'clock. So Michaela, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think we covered everything, yeah.
Perfect. So just as a quick reminder, we'll be following up with you all with the PowerPoint presentation that you see on screen, as well as a link to our YouTube channel. And so please do keep an eye out for that. We do hope to see you on future webinars, and we really do appreciate you all taking the time to join us today. So thank you very much, Michaela. Thank you. And we hope to see you all soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Dustin. Bye-bye.